So yeah, we have something coming up. If you look on the syllabus at the end of the week, don't be too scared. It's a pretty minor assignment. We didn't talk about this yet, did we? Okay, just making sure. So yeah, the abstract is going to be due Friday, 11:59. And abstract goes along with the term paper. So this is your assignment for the term paper. There is only, so like really you can do your essay on pretty much anything that you can relate to class. So anything you can relate to, in a lot of ways, anything you want to look at and look at it sociologically should be fine. I'm going to use the abstracts to give you guys feedback. I might ask you to tweak it or change it a little. What you're doing just to make it a little more sociological, and that's pretty normal, so don't worry about that if you get that note. But at the end of the semester, you're going to have to write a 12-page paper on the topic you choose. And that will, what I'm kind of expecting you to do is kind of like explore the wider literature, right? And this could be on anything we kind of like talk about in class or anything, you know, that sort of sparks your interest you can run with. And the goal is to pretty much just thoroughly research that topic, go and find scholarly sources. But I have a very narrow definition of scholarly sources. I only count 3 things as scholarly sources. You can use other sources if you want, but it won't count as a source. So what I kind of expect you to do is to use academic journals. Do you guys know the difference between academic journals and everybody? Have people in here done the library thing yet? Some of you guys have, some of you guys haven't. I know that we're not quite there yet in BC Experience. So basically, like I expect you to use academic journal articles if you want. Should I show you guys how to find those real quick? Would that be helpful for people, or is that going to be really repetitive? Okay, cool. I'll show you guys how to do that. Okay. So if you go to the library website, go to library. Okay, so it's going to give you this. To find scholarly journal articles, you have to go to an online database. See where I'm at. Slow me down if I move too fast. Then you're going to want to go here. This is the best one to get used, actually. And I'm just going to say that blanketly. This is the one that's going to give you the broadest amount of material. So other ones it works by copyright. This one's a little more general, so it'll find you what you need. Select on absolutely everything. Continue. It says it's going to be slow if you do that. I've never actually noticed it being slow. So, okay. And then what do we want? What sort of things might people want to research? What things are people excited about?
Native Americans, like discrimination.
Discrimination. Native Americans. Probably help if I spell words right. Did I mean? Oh, wonderful! They added that feature. There we go. So to make sure you get what you need, right there, scholarly peer-reviewed journals. So, and that'll provide you with a lot of stuff often. There's another way that you can do this, which would be through Google Scholar, but that takes a little bit more intuition. The nice thing about doing it through here too is you can just automatically interlibrary loan it. So, and that doesn't take very long. Usually if you request an article, the librarians will get it to you in a few days. So as long as you've started your project, which you're going to have resources pretty early before you write in this class, because we have another assignment where you essentially tell me what you found for journal articles, you will you should have plenty of time to wait for things to come in. So, okay. Any questions so far on what I'm expecting for the paper? So you can use those, you can use books, and then you can use primary sources. Now what I mean by primary sources is that it'd be things like if you knew somebody who has like experienced something and you interviewed them, that could be a primary source. Or if it's like a historical document or a government document that talks about it, that's a primary source, right? Or like a good example would be like if somebody wrote, your paper on, I don't know, got interested in writing about a cult group or something, I don't know, and they had a website, that website would be a primary source. It's not an academic source, but it is because it's primary. Does it make sense? So those are the only three things I count. If you want to completely disregard the third because you find that confusing as an idea, go ahead and do that. But the reason why I do this, so the reason why I have a narrow definition is if you were to, I find it really strange that we include a wider array of things like newspapers and stuff. Oh, no problem.
Sorry.
I was just making sure it wasn't me.
You can see my computer, sorry.
So, anyways, the reason why is because, when you guys take sort of like your basic writing courses, they're probably going to let you use things like newspapers or magazines. The thing is that often if you were to go on in school higher, you're not actually allowed to use those things as scholarly sources. So it's kind of good to learn kind of the more rigid standard, I feel like. And so I kind of, that's why I do things the way I do. So, any questions about this? Yeah.
So wait, did you write down in the syllabus where the scholarly journal, like what else?
Oh yeah, that's in so scholarly journals, that's going to be in the assignment, not in the syllabus. So if you look under the assignment folders, there's one that says term paper, and the term paper is not due for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
The term paper is due on, so the term paper is not due until October 23rd. So you're having a long time, but I broke it into steps, right? So that makes sure that we have good quality paper, right? So it allows me to give you feedback along the way. So that, in essence, like that, all you're doing for me this week is an abstract, which, if you go back here again, yeah, but that is listed in the assignment. So if you go back to assignments, abstract is up here. Right? And so an abstract is 150 to 250 words. So does anybody know how much that translates into? This is maybe going to be one of your smallest assignments ever. Yeah, it's like a paragraph. 150 words is nothing, right? Like, and quite literally, like often, so like all an abstract is, and this is basically what the question says, it's basically just a brief explanation of what you're going to research. So you think of it as kind of like a topic statement, right? Like that's basically what it is. So abstracts are really common. You write them pretty much anytime you work on a project in academia. So and you usually write them before you research it. So it's kind of just practice doing that. So kind of outlining what you're interested in, why you're interested in it, how you're thinking about talking about it is kind of the idea in 150 to 250 words. Make sense? All that clear? Great. So those are due on Friday. And then I'll give you guys feedback on them. You won't have to like redo them or anything. It's just feedback so that when you move forward, you have a better idea where you're going. And the comment you'll probably most likely get more than anything else is that it's a little broad and it might be hard to actually narrow. You might have to narrow it down a little to actually be able to write about it. And that's usually the note I give to people. That's most common. Okay, any questions on that? Cool. For those of you at home, if you have questions, just send them to me through the internet. week we're talking about criminology. So I was going to do is, you guys have 2 articles. I was going to cover those in the next on Wednesday and Friday. And I picked those more because I think that they kind of are things that can set us up to talk about like reforms of the criminal justice system, some of the stuff that's been in the news without directly reading and talking about it. So like there's the one on what's going on in Canada with Indigenous Native American populations, and then there's the other on something called restorative justice. It'll get us kind of thinking about. So I thought that would be interesting and pertinent, but because I decided to focus on that, I want to today mostly focus on the more like traditional theories of crime. So yeah, this week is criminology and deviance. So criminology is a subfield of sociology. Anybody want to venture a guess what it studies?
Criminals.
Crime, yeah. So criminology is the study of crime. Criminology is a type of deviance study. Deviance is more broad, which is really the subfield that attempts to answer the question, why do people break rules? And one of the explanations we're going to look at today is actually more of a theory of deviance, because not everything that it discusses is criminal. So that's the difference between criminology and massive cold, like glasses are sliding down now. Okay. So that's the difference between criminology and deviance. So there's 2, so before we hit the 20th century, there's really only 2 different theories of crime. One is what's called the deterrence theory. And the other are biological theories of crime. Both of which are not commonly used in criminology today. So, why is this a significant, or the reason why is this our starting point? Because our way of dealing with crime as a culture directly grows out of these 2 theories. And then in some ways we could view all of 20th century criminology as trying to find a new explanation, to invent new ways of dealing with crime. So how do we treat crime in the United States? What do we do to deal with crime? What do we do to reduce crime, get rid of crime? What mechanisms does our government use?
We arrest people.
We arrest people. Why do we arrest people?
Is that the law?
What's that?
Because of the law.
What do we do with them after we arrest them?
Throw them in jail.
We throw them in jail. Why do we throw them in jail?
I guess take a bad person off the streets so that we don't have to worry about them committing another crime.
Oh, so yeah. We do it to eliminate criminals. That's a good one. Why else do we do it? Why else do we?
Maintain peace.
What do we mean by that?
Well, we take out the disturbance of the peace, continue to have a peaceful society.
So yeah, I mean, no, that's still kind of like eliminating the criminal. What else? What else do we use? Do everyone who goes to jail stay there?
Nope.
What's that?
Nope.
No. So what might be another reason we send people to jail?
In theory, so that they can learn to be a better person.
So you could do it for reform. This is one that doesn't quite fit in with either of these very well. Why else?
As punishment for causing harm to.
Sorry, I couldn't hear you over the fan.
As punishment for causing harm to someone or something.
And the other is to punish. Why do we punish people? What's the point of punishment?
In hopes that they won't do it again.
Well,
You have that punishment.
so it's that they might not do it again. Why else? Do we only punish people for the people who've already committed crimes? What might be another reason? Do we only punish people who break crimes for the people who've already broke crimes?
It's kind of like speed limit. There's speed limit at 40 miles per hour, just so you don't break it. But you're not necessarily breaking the law when you're going 40.
Did you have something else you wanted to add?
To deter other people from committing the same crime.
Yeah, and so essentially the deterrence theory is the idea that, you know, basically like you use punishment to guide behavior. Right, which in some ways reform is also that. So you use your punishment to guide people's behavior. That's what eliminating criminals is more of a biological theory. Like criminals are so broken that we just have to dispose of them, right? But the deterrence theory is that you use punishment to guide behavior. It's the philosophy that originally our criminal justice system is built upon, right? This idea. And the idea is that we are basically these rational actors who sort of like weigh cost and benefit before acting. So the deterrence theory of crimes, understanding what criminals do, is that a criminal will essentially, like, if somebody's going to, let's say the hypothetical crime is somebody robs a liquor store, right? Our understanding of how that happens is for, you know, however long before, right, the person robs the liquor store that they start thinking about it. It could be an hour, it could be a week, it could be minutes, right? They're going to sit there and they're going to think about, okay, if I rob the liquor store, how much money am I going to make? And what's the risk if I get caught? And then they try to make a calculated answer. So how do you keep people from committing crime? Essentially, you increase the cost. Right? You make the punishment stronger, you make the likelihood of getting caught higher. So all that seems pretty like intuitive, right? The only problem is that it doesn't really actually seem to work at all. Like there's not been literally like no evidence since we've been using the deterrence theory that changing punishments and increasing the police force lowers crime. And I don't mean that like even the most conservative criminologists would generally agree with that. Like that's not an extreme statement at all. So why do you think that might be? Well, maybe some reasons why it doesn't. Because that's really kind of what it leaves us in the position of. Why doesn't it? Why wouldn't it work that way? What are some explanations? Because it seems automatic, right? Like you raise the speed limit to 45, right? People will, you know, or you increase the ticket cost for speeding, less people will speed, right? Although that doesn't happen usually when we increase cost of tickets or increase speed, decrease the speed. Why is that? Or we'd say if there was more cops on the street, less people would speed, but it doesn't really work. In your lifetime, have you known less people to speed? Do you not know people who speed, go over the speed limit? Do you guys not go over the speed limit? How aware are you of how much a speeding ticket costs in the state of Atchison, Kansas, or here in Kansas? If you drive here, are you going to speed? Are you acting like the rational actor? No, you don't know the cost, you don't know the benefit, right? Like, well, you know the benefit, like I'll get there, you know, 4 minutes faster or 3 minutes faster. Which is a really small benefit, by the way, right? Yeah, everybody speeds all the time, right? And the reason why is because essentially, like, the deterrence theory doesn't really work. We don't sit around making decisions this way. That's not really how we work as human beings, right? That would be one explanation why deterrence doesn't work, in particular. So deterrence theory seems not to work, so we have to kind of get rid of it. Doesn't really make sense. It makes sense. It makes a lot of sense, but people don't do it. So, and people for higher level crimes, it's the same way. You know, you are very unlikely in committing criminal actions to really think about being punished when you do it, right? You often have other things on your mind that you calculate. You might, that's not to say criminals are irrational to some degree, like you could say that everybody is, right? But, like, by and large, they do a calculation. The other is biological theories. So if you were to, what would be an example of a theory of crime based on biology?
Well, there's some research that says that people are genetically more inclined to have certain behaviors. It's like if their parents were alcoholic, then you're more likely to be alcoholic. Not because of their behavior, but because of your genes.
What is a something like alcoholism would be an example of deviance, right? Or, you know, if you extended that to something like addictive personalities, right? Maybe, you know, sometimes it's a biological explanation. What would be another example of biological explanation? Anybody here watch crime dramas? Like a lot of people watch these because they're like all over TV, right? And a lot of times those crime dramas revolve specifically around murder. I've never really seen like a crime drama that revolves around like shoplifting. Might be interesting, I don't know. But, so what is often our explanation of why people would commit murder?
The emotional drive.
Some sort of irrational emotional drive. What else? Let's think about what's our story about why people are serial killers? It seems to be like the crime people are most obsessed about in the United States, even though it's exceptionally rare. If you've ever been worried about a serial killer, you can stop, because the only people who are going to murder you are your own family members. No, that's completely true. The only people who murder people are people's friends and family. If you don't know somebody, they ain't going to murder you. Why would they? They don't know you. Anyway, so going back to serial killers, why do we explain, how do most TV shows we watch it explain something like a serial killer, or what? They're crazy, right? Like essentially, like a lot of times with our biological theories, they revolve around things like people being crazy, right? As a general explanation of crime, like there's some narrow circumstances where biology works as an explanation. That would be something like mental illness or alcoholism. But as an overarching explanation of crime, to explain patterns of crime, it works really bad. I'll give you an example of this is a long time, but once again I said this isn't like radical stuff, right? Like this is pretty run-of-the-mill criminology. So the study that really challenged the biological theories of crime was one done in around 1900 by Shaw and McKay. And Shaw and McKay did this extended study of where crimes happen in the city of Chicago. Anyways, so at the time, the cities had a little bit different setup at that time. So you have your downtown. I'm going to drop this way. So, zones. One is downtown. Two is factories. Three, residential. And four is residential. Okay, so zone one is the downtown. Chicago. As is today, how wealthy do you have to be to live downtown? In downtown Chicago.
It's expensive.
What's that? It's expensive, yeah. When I was like a teenager, like it was really cheap to live in the middle of cities because nobody ever wanted to go there, but it kind of flipped. There's this whole re-urbanization movement. But anyways, nowadays, the downtown is generally speaking pretty expensive, as it was in the time of Sean McKay. Now, just by historical happenstance, the downtown is generally surrounded by a series of factories. So factories surround the downtown. So those are zone 1 and zone 2. And so the factories aren't really where people live, right? And then surrounding this is 2 other residential zones, which we're just going to call zone 3 and zone 4. So if you're not rich enough to live downtown, what do you think is going to be your more desirable location? Yeah, 4. Why do you think that is?
It's on the outskirts of the city, therefore it's probably really cheap.
It's not just, it's actually the second most expensive zone. Because it's farther away from the factories, yeah. So like, factories are dirty, they pollute, right? It's even like today, like you leave Chicago, you drive through Erie, Indiana, right? Erie, nobody's here from Erie, right? Okay, great. Like, Erie is a crappy place to live. And it smells horrible all the time. Most of the trees in the whole town are dead, right? Because it's so polluted there. Like, but the point is, right, like it's not a particularly desirable place to live. So who lives in zone 3, do you think? Who lives in zone 3? Who lives in undesirable places?
I guess we're going like stereotypical, I guess drug dealers or people who can't really afford a whole lot.
Yeah, I'll take the latter of those. Yeah. It's people who can't afford to live anywhere else in the city, right? That's who lives in zone 3, right? It seems pretty obvious. At that time, it would have been mostly immigrant families. And so there's a particular history here. Keep in mind, they're tracing it over time. So regardless of what time period you're talking about, zone 3 has the highest crime rate at this time in Chicago, right? So during the course of their study, zone 3 maintains having the same crime rate. But in this period, like you have people moving in, and this is like the days of like, you know, the potato famine and things like that, right? Like there was a lot of famine in Europe, and there was a lot of populations moving out to the United States who couldn't afford very much, right? So essentially the pattern wasn't that those people would start in zone 3 when they first got there. What do you think happened if they made enough money? Where would they go? Where would you go if you were living in zone 3? Yeah, you move out, right? And so that's actually what John McKay found, is that essentially the zone 3, the population is constantly overturning, right? So one population moves in, another population moves out. Okay, so why does this finding support the idea that biology isn't a good explanation for crime?
It seems more likely that the place that they're living was causing the crime than who's living there.
Yeah, when they move out, they stop committing crimes. Right? So essentially, like some other circumstance, right, has to be utilized to explain it, right? Sean McKay, there's this generally called social disorganization theory. Their theory is usually based off of the movement of people. So they would want to claim that places where you have a lot of turnover and movement actually have higher crime rates, right? Because essentially, like, they don't establish communities, they're not as connected to people, right? So that would be the explanation that they would generally give. But the point being is this: with what predominated as our theories of crime for a couple hundred years suddenly disappeared in the 20th century and it got replaced by sort of flood of different theories of deviance. So Sean McKay's social disorganization is one. And we're going to look at a couple of others as well. Maybe not today. So the one, another really common one amongst criminologists is something called strain theory. Which is started by somebody named Robert Merton. After that, we're going to talk about Durkheim. Like I said, this might get kicked off until the next class, but we're going to talk about Durkheim and something called Ononite. But, so strain theories, Robert Merton's strain theory goes like this: that we shouldn't be trying to explain crime in general. We should instead explain why crime exists in specific places and times. In this case, he's interested in why is it that in the United States in the 20th century, this was a while ago, he was writing mostly in the 60s. Why is it that you get, how do we explain most of the crime around us, right? And if we can explain what causes most of the crime around us in an immediate sense, we can do something about it. And so, with Merton, there's a tension in the United States that he thinks can explain most crime and a fair amount of deviance in general, which he wants to explain it as a contradiction between our cultural goals and the means by which we're told to pursue them. So, within the United States, what really is often set as the goal of your life? What should be the thing that you're really trying to achieve?
Get rich.
Yeah. And that is exactly Merton's answer. Right? So the goal is essentially to obtain wealth. Anybody who doesn't have the goal of obtaining wealth in some way, shape, or form in American society is deviant. They do not accept this whole culturally accepted goals. Right? Okay, how are you supposed to obtain wealth? What are you supposed to do to get it? You're supposed to work throughout. Yes, the means is work. Right? Okay, can most people in the United States obtain wealth through their work? No. I mean, you even take into consideration, this is like one of my things I like to throw on, who works the most in America? Like, if we were to take hour per hour, who works the most? What part of the population do you think? The working poor. Working poor work the most. Obviously, for the working poor, the means to wealth is not obtaining the goal, right? So because we don't have a way of like releasing this, according to Merton, people have to develop some form of deviant behavior. And so they either are going to accept the means, or they're going to fail to accept. They're going to not accept those means. They're going to reject them. Right? Or they're going to accept the goals, or they're going to reject them. Right? But there's going to be some people who are capable of accepting both, right? People who at least make enough wealth off of their work that they feel like this is good and right and works, are called conformists in his system. And by conformist, it's the only category that doesn't have to reject anything, right? So if you're lucky enough to be people who are wealthy enough through your work to feel like it's the working system, then you can conform. But if you can't do that, what else can you do? What else can you do? How do you relieve this tension?
Commit crime.
What's that?
Commit crime.
You could commit crime. Let's give an example. What kind of crimes could you commit to make lots of money?
Like rob to get to that status you want to be at.
Yeah. You could rob, you could be a drug dealer.
Tax fraud.
What's that?
Tax fraud.
You could commit tax fraud, you could become a bank robber, whatever, right? You're an innovator. That's his term. Not all innovators are criminals, though. How else can you reject the means of wealth but obtain the goal? What other things could you do? What non-illegal things don't involve hard work and are ways of getting money?
Like becoming an overnight celebrity and not doing anything difficult.
Yeah. Well, certain kinds of celebrities, I think they perform out this work, like actors, like, you know, you just get actors who are like, yeah, he starved himself for 10 months and like lived in the ghetto and he built this whole roll up over years, and then he, that kind of thing, that sort of like weird method actor thing. So like those people I think manage to, but then you get celebrities like, I don't know, like people on reality TV shows. Like they're trying to innovate, right? They're not claiming to work hard. Does that make sense? So these are innovators, right? That's anything that you would do that isn't work to obtain wealth, right? This could also be things like trying to win the lottery, doing get rich quick schemes, like any of this sort of stuff would allow you to reject the means but accept the goals. What else can you do? You can accept the means but reject the goal. What would that be? If you reject the goals of making wealth.
And you're content to be poor, or you just decide you're going to be poor and you're not going to be able to do anything to change that.
Yeah, so you might just decide you're going to be poor but work really hard anyways, right? You might just have a strong work ethic, right? He likes to call these people ritualists. Anyone who's working class knows a fair number of people who completely reject the idea of making money, but like work really hard anyways. Essentially, that's a ritualist. Or you could be somebody who works really hard within something narrow that you really like, you know, or something you feel strongly about. Like, I don't know, like social workers might be a good example of a ritualist, right? They work really hard. They know they're never going to make any money being a social worker, but they kind of accept the values of work, right? They just reject the goals of wealth. Or you can reject both, you know, and he calls this escapism. Who might reject both the goal? Can we give examples of an escapist? People who reject both the goals and the means.
People who live in their parents' basements.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah.
Would like a monk be an example?
A what?
A monk?
A monk, yeah. Monks reject like work in the way we normally mean it, right? Like there's prayer. We wouldn't call monks lazy, right? But like, yeah, monks would be a form of escapism. What else might be? And in some ways, like monks, by the definition of it, are are deviant, right? They don't follow what most people do. You know, so by definition, they're not. What else would maybe an example of escapism? There's one that's connected to crime that we aren't thinking of.
Is it the junkies from Ireland?
From what?
From Scotland that we're talking about?
Yeah. So I mean, like drug addicts would be another good example of escapists, right? Or there's one other way you can reject everything, and that's to be an act of rebellion. Right? Rebellions reject both often, and they supplant new means and new goals in replacement of it. So they attempt to build a new society. So, okay, well, that is it for the class today. We will talk about Durkheim and then roll into talking about our articles. So, on Wednesday. Thank you all for coming. No, it's due at 11:59.
Okay, so I'm
So by the end
ready.
of the day.
Okay.
Have a good day.
You too. Have a good one.